Welcome back to another conscious recovery conversation. Today, we are thrilled to have Alison Crair here with us. Alison, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. So excited.
Me too. Me too. So I thought before we jump into today's topic, which is owning your power in a seemingly powerless time, I thought we would just check in with each other and see how we're doing. Alison, how are you doing?
I am doing well, for sure. It's a roller coaster. So, it's adjustment, but I feel like it's an opportunity to serve in a different way and just kind of trying to stay in that place versus, feeling disempowered and have, in victimy. I am reaching out to as many people as I can and checking in on them. And I think that makes them feel good, and it makes me feel good that I'm doing that. So it's interesting times for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. TJ, how about you?
Well, I'm as Alison's speaking, and we talked, in the green room before we went live, that this is an opportunity for us to pivot, into what we really are here to, who we are here to be, what we're here to do. Live more on purpose. But part of that is, I think sometimes with the positive thinking movement, I think that sometimes there's a piece that gets overlooked, and that is it's also okay to feel whatever you're feeling. It's also okay to be sad. It's also okay to be happy, because I was talking with someone earlier, and she said one of her children were like, it's not okay for you to be happy right now. People are suffering. So whatever you're experiencing, joy, sadness, anger, frustration, connection, open-heartedness, I just wanted to start with that because I know for me, as Alison said, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster. And I know for myself, the best way to ride that roller coaster is actually to ride it and just allow myself to be in it while also looking for how we can move back into owning our power in the midst of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautifully said. And I think that's about where I'm at too, where, I think there are definitely a lot of situations happening that are potentially painful and scary. And, it feels kind of uncertain, and that can bring about a lot of anxiety. But also I've found that it's brought in a lot of really powerful things to the forefront, like our ability to connect through, digital platforms and be able to maintain relationships and create new ones. And so I really like the roller coaster metaphor. And that really segues us to our topic today, which is owning our power in a seemingly powerless time. And so I know for a lot of people, the past couple of weeks have been a real test of how we are dealing with external forces internally. And so what I thought we'd start with, I was going to read a piece from Conscious Recovery to kind of springboard the conversation and see what you guys think. So this is from the chapter in Conscious Recovery titled Owning Your Power. And this is what I wanted to share. It says, I'm inviting you to consider how you can move from powerlessness to feeling empowered and discovering your true power. This power is different from willpower, different from force or coercion. It's not making things happen. It's tapping into the ultimate truth of who and what you are. As you grow in conscious awareness and begin to recognize that your core beliefs are really choices, as you find and participate in supportive communities where you feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to be authentic, as you begin to consciously choose to practice the principles of non-resistance, non-judgment, presence, and so on, you can begin to experience the power of who and what you truly are. And so when I read that, I picked that intentionally because I think it is such a perfect description of what real power can be. So I wanted to see if either of you had thoughts on that as pertaining to kind of what's happening right now. TJ, what do you think?
Well, thank you for that reading. I thought, well, that's really nice. Oh, wait.
You wrote it.
And I love that you actually framed it with, this is an opportunity for us to practice that, right? So that was one of the things that was really striking to me as all this unfolded. And, it was interesting. I was having lunch with my best friend on on the Monday that this all went into effect, and there was a wave of energy that came in, and there was something that we didn't know exactly what was happening, but someone came in and said, you need to close your restaurant now. And there was this frenzy, and we noticed this sudden shift. Like there was an energetic shift, and I recognized at that point, whoa, what's my choice here? It's really easy to go unconscious. And what I appreciate about that part of the reading or that part of the book is it really allows me to recognize that when I'm deeply connected or I'm aware of my oneness with source or the ultimate truth of who I am, I'm less bounced around by the fluctuations of the world. Now, on a daily basis, that would be something like, for many of us, it's like, oh, there's traffic. Can I roll with that? Or, maybe something happens in our external world that is uncomfortable or difficult, like a breakup or the loss of a job. But this is something that's much bigger for many of us, or at least seemingly bigger. And so it's really an invitation to look at, whoa, can I practice all of this in the midst of this, right? Because it is different than willpower. I can't make this virus go away. I can't make the government make the choices that I think are the right ones, which, by the way, who knows if those would be the right ones. But I recognize that I have all these perspectives, but the key here is to not try to control and manipulate the outer world, but to recognize that in the midst of absolutely anything happening, we can choose peace. We can choose openness. I'm thinking about Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. He was in a concentration camp. That's real powerlessness, right? He could not change that. And his book is about, is it possible for us to find inner freedom even in the midst of something like that? And that's not what we're experiencing, right? That's nowhere near as extreme as that. So we always do have a choice. I'm either choosing consciously or unconsciously, and many of us are asleep. And if we turn on the media, it puts us to sleep. It lulls us into believing things that aren't the whole story. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's really about recognizing that, about pausing that thinking, allowing those thoughts to be, but really spending time dedicating myself to cultivating a relationship with the essential self, because that's the only way that I have discovered to find true peace in the midst of an ever-changing world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Alison, I know that in your coaching business, you work with a lot of people on owning their powers. So I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
Wow. Well, there's like so much. I mean, this really is what coaching or all of the stuff that we talk about is. Any of like the big people, Tony Robbins, anybody, it's about mastering yourself. Yeah. And so everything that, I agree with everything that TJ just said. And then also, what is our personal and kind of integrity that we need to really work on in times of stress like this to maintain. And I think what I've been working on with my clients and myself is really keeping it simple. So keeping your foundational things like eat, move, and sleep. Like if you can control those things. You can control what time you go to bed the night before. You can control what time you get up. And when I feel like when that stuff is in alignment, it's so much easier to deal with the external stresses that are going on for us, and then what other, the things that you can control, which then make you feel empowered versus disempowered, like there's classic things that disempower us, like I said, not eating well, not moving your body, gossiping, like all those things. That is when there's like sort of like a toxic feeling in the air is so easy to kind of like jump on board with, So I just know for myself when I think, okay, like, is this decision I'm going to make right now going to empower me or disempower me? And now more than ever, it's just I just have to keep it super simple, getting out, getting some light, getting some movement, listening to empowering people, reading empowering things, like conscious recovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's so true what both of you are saying, and I think what I'm pulling from it is that it is a choice on a very deep level to be in a position of power internally. And I think one of the things that we often take for granted is the fact that we do have that choice. And, these forces that are happening externally can be so daunting and so overwhelming that it can almost negatively, or not negatively, it can influence us to believing that we don't have power.
Mhm.
Which is really kind of the next thing I wanted to touch on, which in that same chapter of Conscious Recovery, TJ talks about the power of perception, right? And one of my favorite quotes, I'm going to pull it up because I love it so much, but in talking about how we perceive things, right? TJ writes that as we grow in awareness, we develop the ability to shift how we interpret the circumstances of life and what we call reality. So that's it can be a somewhat of a cerebral concept, right? Of, our perception creates reality. But I'm curious to hear what you guys have on that in relation to everything that's happened over the last month.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, again, a lot of times people will think what we're saying is pretend like this isn't happening, only focus on the positive. And that, for me, that's not really at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is life is happening, and that's always happening. And then I interpret what's happening and then create what I call reality based on my interpretation far more than what's happening, because I have heard people in so much fear around this, and they're having this experience, and there's almost a, how dare you say anything that seems positive right now, because look at what we're going through. And this might not be popular to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. Every 3 months in our country, 9,000 people die from gun violence. Every 3 months in our country, 12,000 people die from suicide. Every 3 months in our country, and this is just the US, 17,000 people die from drug overdoses. So we are calling this a pandemic. I'm not saying it's not, but what I'm saying is, let's look, because I mean, the death toll is up to 5,200 people in America, in the United States. So we're not saying that's not happening, but there's all these other things as well. And I think what happens with some of these, like drug addiction, overdoses, suicides, there's almost it becomes the norm, right? We normalize it. Like, oh, another round of gun violence. We somehow normalize that. So what I'm saying is that these events are happening right now. What's happening is there's all this focus on this one thing, which again is happening, but I can call it horrific, or I can also say there's a lot of opportunity here for us to connect more, to be more on purpose, to share our love, to be of service. I always think about Mr. Rogers, when his mother, he would watch something horrific on TV and his mother would say, look for the helpers. There's always helpers. We're seeing, in our industry, in the addiction treatment and behavioral health and mental well-being world, that people are stepping up, because what we're seeing is people that don't recognize that they have a choice in how they create what's called reality, and they're buying into the paradigm of fear, because that's the pandemic. The real pandemic here is fear. That's the bigger pandemic, right? So we're being called right now to serve people, to say, you can, in the midst of this, maintain your power. You can, in the midst of this, maintain connection. And if anything, what I think one of the byproducts of this is we're being asked to slow down and to really reflect on what is mine to do. Who have I come here to be? How can I serve? We were talking before we went on the air. As an extrovert, I miss hugs. I miss human connection. I miss being with my friends and colleagues and family and loved ones. That's just part of the reality, but I do have a choice in how I frame it. I can say, isn't that horrible? Or I can say, wow, isn't it really beautiful that I had that so much and I'm longing for that? That's a beautiful thing. I don't have to view that as something that's negative. I can say, it's a beautiful thing that I love human connection and hugs, and I look forward to when we're allowed to do that again.
Absolutely. Alison,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Well, I think two things about that. One, I do think that what we're going to start seeing is, how we got to this place just didn't happen overnight. It didn't just start in December. And, like TJ was saying, there's a lot of other things that have been going on, and we're going to have to look back and reflect about how we got here and the changes that we're going to need to make, which will be really interesting. And we're going to all have to step up to make lifestyle changes so that we don't end up in this place again. But about the perception piece, I was thinking, part of my practice is using the pivot process, which you guys know, Lori Jean. She and I were having a discussion the other day about how a lot of the crisis survival energy is so familiar for those of us that have like attachment disorder. My childhood was really challenging. And then, the 2008 financial crisis, like there's certain times in our lives that not toxic, but that really scary energy feels really familiar. So I think a lot of people are being triggered back to times in their life where they were disempowered. A lot of my clients are saying, gosh, this reminds me of when I was, little and I was in an abusive home or whatever. And that's because that perception in our bodies, because it's not just what's happening around us, it's what lives in our bodies and where. Yeah. And that's coming up. And so Lori Jean and I were talking about, it's really important to ask those questions. Is what you're going through and feeling what you're seeing and what's happening? Or is it something that you're kind of like bringing into the moment to sort of enable that disempowering? And the shelter in place thing is not meant to keep us like, in our room with the shades drawn. It's almost the opposite. It's the time where we're safe at home and we reach out to people. So I don't know if that makes any sense, a little bit all over the place, but
I think it makes perfect sense. And I think, what I'm pulling from what both of you said is that the ability to decide how you're perceiving things is very empowering. And so what I see, whether I'm working with clients, whether I'm working with professionals or just people in my life, is that you see all these different responses to not only what's going on right now, but just generally where, I could watch a bit on the news and go into judgment about it and go into a mind state of sorrow and longing, and also choose, like TJ said, to notice the helpers, to notice, for all these ODs happening, there are also X number of people graduating programs and living beautiful lives. And so I think that a lot of times in the conversation about perception, people can say, well, you can't just choose to always see the bright side, right? Which I find very interesting by itself, but that's another conversation, I think. But where I like to be, my default position is I like to consider the situation as a whole. While this is very difficult, there's also a lot of really good coming out of it. I think that like one of the things I saw this morning that was so wholesome, it brought me to tears, was, the response that I think it was in Boston or somewhere like that when the shift changed at a hospital and all the nurses left and the other nurses came and all the apartment buildings surrounding the hospital were cheering. And I was like, oh my gosh, when else would that happen? And it's such a beautiful situation where everybody just comes together and it's just so much love. And it's like, that wouldn't happen unless we were in this situation. And so I think that there's so much power in being able to decide how you want to perceive things.
I agree. Marin is at 8:00 every night now. Marin, everybody goes out and howls. It is so loud.
That's amazing.
I know that everybody has wants to be involved and connected and be part of something.
Mm-hmm. And that is so empowering by itself, right? Is the longing to remain connected when supposedly we can't. Mm-hmm. And I think that right there is the perception. There are some people I know, I'm so fortunate to live on a big piece of property and I can go run around outside all day and not run into anybody. But it's funny because I'll post something on Instagram like, oh, what a beautiful day. And I get all these DMs like, Jeremy, why aren't you inside? Right. And I'm like, well, who said I have to be inside? I'm at home, but I'm still, my perception of it is such that I can get outside and enjoy this beautiful place I happen
I
to
think
live
you're
in.
allowed to go outside, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You're just not allowed to like go outside with strangers.
That's right. Yeah. So the next thing I wanted to jump to in the same chapter, of course, was something that we were kind of touching on, and that's the power of compassion. And so in Conscious Recovery, TJ talks about the different types of power. And the power of compassion is probably one of my favorite sections out of the book, because it really speaks to dropping into your heart space and fostering that connection. And I wanted to read one of the quotes. Now, TJ, you're going to have to help me out with this name. Excuse me. Is it Pema Chodron?
Perfect.
Yes.
I
Okay.
hear her name pronounced all different ways. So whatever you say is perfect.
Okay, good. So Pema Chodron puts it this way: compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity.
Yeah, and that's one of my very favorite quotes, and it's the foundation for me personally in the work that I do in the addiction treatment space and the behavioral health space. It's a recognition that I'm not the one with the answers, or I'm not the healed one, and I'm working with someone that's broken. When I recognize my shared humanity, and I want to go back to something that Alison said, I think it's so powerful. What we know about PTSD is, yes, this event is happening, but what's really happening, in addition to what's happening in real time, what's really happening is something from the past is being activated, right? Unresolved trauma, as we talk about in Conscious Recovery, as a driving force of addiction, but also all sorts of things. And there's something about compassion that allows me to recognize that everything that anyone is going through, I also have experienced on some level. It doesn't mean that I'm saying, oh, I understand exactly what you're feeling, because I don't. But I do know that when we tap into a deeper level of awareness, we're really all one, right? At the level of spirit. And so what Alison said that I think is so important, and I'm paraphrasing you, Alison, but it's really important right now for me to recognize what's actually getting touched and what's getting activated, because that compassionate lens also comes back toward myself, self-compassion. I notice I'm angry. I notice I'm sad. I notice I'm really filled with joy, but maybe I think I'm not supposed to be right now. All of those different things. Because what happens is if I don't allow myself to feel deeply what's happening and recognize what's being touched, I'm going to project it outward. And that's why, Jeremy is out in his, huge property that he calls a yard. In San Francisco, that's like, half the city. But that people are like, stay inside, because there could be a judgment to you instead of like, what am I really feeling right now? And so I think the greatest gift that any of us can offer this situation is to pause and really reflect on what's getting touched. As Alison said, it's living in the body. Be aware of that. And then through the compassionate lens, when I have the compassion for myself, I can have it for someone else. Then I might not have to post my judgment on Facebook or post my judgment on Instagram or use a hashtag that's not even accurate. There are these hashtags now that are telling us that we have to lock ourselves in our houses. There are some people that are quarantined, but for most of us, that's not even the guideline, right? But something's getting touched in the psyche of the human experience right now, where we're saying, oh my gosh, we have to protect ourselves. It's interesting. So recognizing what's actually getting touched rather than being in the story of what's happening will create the ability to have more freedom. And the bottom line is, when I can do it for me, I can do that for you. I can move out of judgment and into compassion. Oh, I understand why you're scared. I have been scared during this. I have been angry. I have been sad. I have been relieved. I have been concerned. So when I have compassion for my own inner process, I can also be available for someone else's.
Alison, what do you think? I mean, in your work, what role does that compassion play with you and your clients?
Well, I think a lot like what TJ was saying, but I do think my approach has really always been that I'm just a little bit further down the path than some other people. I just have learned certain things. And if I can shepherd someone through that, that's my ultimate honor, is to be able to say I have, whether I have been there exactly or not. And then and I really do have to say, to have self-compassion takes a lot of courage, because you do have to be okay with being a little vulnerable and saying, things weren't always so great for me, and maybe that was just even yesterday. I was just telling TJ before we started, Friday and Saturday were a little rough for me around this. I was kind of depressed, and I was coping by eating too much sugar, and I wasn't in my personal integrity around those things. And so I really had to be honest with myself and pull myself out of it and say, I'm not going to cope this way. This isn't who I want to be on the other side of this. So that self-compassion to really parent myself, when my child was like, I really just want to stay in bed and be in my ugly sweats and, watch stupid tiger show. I don't know what that is. So yeah, I just, self-compassion through this is really important. And then just one other thing really quick is that I think it's the language we use around this, TJ, something that you said about, locking ourselves in, that's one of the things that's used is, oh, we're on lockdown, right, quarantine. These are scary terms. When you think about like the population with which we work with a lot of the time is, we have to 5150 people, which is into a lockdown where they actually can't leave, or if someone has to go to prison and they're locked in. So the fact that these are the terms that we're using just with each other, as well as hearing on the news over and over again, I think puts people also into that feeling of helplessness, where I'm not supposed to leave the house, when really, shelter in place, go out for walks, go to the grocery store. We could live happily if we choose to, doing those things. As long as you're outside, you're connecting with people in the best way that you can, and you're not locked in. You're not, the police are not going to come by your house and say, get back inside, But for a lot of people, that's the narrative that they are creating and living by and sharing and promoting and judging around. So, yeah, I agree with all that.
Yeah, and I love that, Alison, because you're speaking to what happens in the collective, right? The collective consciousness. And fear breeds that. And then we create a shared narrative that's not even reality. There are some people that have to quarantine for 14 days. There are some people that have that, but for most of us, that's not even the guideline. But when we have this shared story, and I love what you talked about, because that's the sense of powerlessness that a lot of people struggle with. There's something outside of me that's going to take me over. And so if I'm really connected with myself, essentially, I realize that isn't something happening to me. Right. That's not really what's happening. And as you said so beautifully, what's getting touched is a big question. What's really happening for me? I think mindfulness, meditation is really important right now, slowing down and really being aware of what's happening, not so much in my mind, but in my emotional center, and then in even deeper in the beingness of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to shift the conversation just slightly and, talk about one of the things in conscious recovery that TJ speaks to, especially in terms of compassion, even just in that quote, is that if I'm working with clients, whether as a clinician or a counselor, whether it's behavioral health or substance abuse or coaching, whatever it may be, if I'm viewing that person through the lens of brokenness, that energy I bring into the room is going to be sensed. They're going to feel that. They're going to feel that there's a bit of a patriarchy there, where I look up to my therapist, I look up to my coach, rather than just two people across the table from one another. And I think that that framework is so relevant to everything that's happening right now with COVID-19 and the shelter in place and everything, is that it's almost like if I'm not doing what other people expect me to do, I'm less than, right? If I'm not in my house, or if I'm not, following the guidelines exactly how I should, there's this kind of uneven perspective. And I think that there are obviously, like, if a bunch of kids are out partying right now, that's obviously inappropriate. I'm not saying, we should look at everybody like they're doing the right thing. But what I am saying is that being able to acknowledge that as human beings, one of the ways that we can really cultivate our own power is by considering the idea that we can look at each other as equals, right? And that's really powerful work, a really powerful perspective in our work. And so, TJ, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, if we could shift a little more towards, the power of compassion in the work that we do with our clients.
Yeah, every moment I have a choice. I can judge or I can love. And in some ways, it comes down to that simplicity. Now, we could use different words, but there's always a choice, right? I can choose to open my heart or close my heart. I can choose to be present with someone, or I can choose distraction. There's part of the Course in Miracles that says everything is love, or a request for love. And we often hear everything is love or fear. That can be true, but also, what's the request here? And I don't mean consciously necessarily, but what's really being called forth here? How do I want to contribute to this? How do I want to stand in my own power? And again, we're not talking about willpower or force. We're talking about stepping into a deeper reality. And when I am able to do that for me, I'm able to do that for the people around me. And then I don't have to close off, right? And that's really compassion. That's that shared humanity. I have compassion and understanding for where everyone is at. And then I can look for the request for love. Jeremy, you and I talk a lot about questions and the power of questions. And some of the questions we can live in right now that can be really powering is, how can I love more today? How can I be more open to seeing the love all around me today? What else is possible here? What's mine to do in the midst of this? Who have I really come here to be? We can ask these questions that open us up to looking for the request for love. And then on another way to speak to it is, in my own life, deep fulfillment has come from making a difference in the world in some way. And we all have our own unique way. When I'm on purpose, I'm also of service to others. And when I'm of service to others, I'm on purpose, right? So when I'm able to recognize there's so many opportunities to serve right now, that is going to look different for everyone, right? I'm definitely not going to be a nurse in this lifetime. That is definitely not my skill set nor my calling, but I am here to use my own unique voice. We all have the unique voice. We all have a unique way of being of service in the world. And I think that's something that's being called forward right now.
Alison, what about you? How is that perspective applied in the work that you do?
I was thinking a lot about what TJ was saying, and that I don't know if you guys have all heard about the energetic level of things, and love being the highest. There's a scale, an energetic scale, and shame being the very lowest. You're vibrating at such a low place. So if you walk into a session, or you begin a session with someone, and you don't walk in or prepare yourself to be just that conduit to healing versus, I know more, I went to school, or this is the right way in which you're supposed to live, or you're broken, or whatever a lot of people run up against. If you can walk in there and be compassionate and vulnerable within reason, and of service, then you're going to raise the energy in that room, so that person doesn't have to vibrate on that on that plane. Because typically, if we're talking about recovery people, people come to me at all different levels, whether it's life coaching or wellness or mindful, whatever. But for that perception piece, I just think that it's so important to really be open and loving, and, and it's okay to not know all of the answers and say, I don't know, let's explore that more. I don't know, and be vulnerable in that way as a human being. And then, TJ said something else that just reminded me, of that saying, know thyself. The more we know about ourselves and we do all of this work and search, I think all three of us are such searchers, always doing work, always looking for more, I don't know. I just feel like the more we know ourselves, the more we can show up authentically to people. And,
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So I think in closing, if I could get final thoughts from you both, I think what I would want to look into would be if there are people that are feeling really challenged right now with a sense of powerlessness, or if they're, feeling an invitation to creating more of their own power, what would be some pieces of wisdom or encouragement that you guys would give them? TJ, what do you think?
We could go 20 minutes with this. I won't in this moment. I think it's kind of a recap of some of the things that the three of us have shared, starting with acknowledging and honoring whatever experience you're having, right? And as Alison spoke to, one person that does that scale that I love is David Hawkins, and his book, Power versus Force, I believe. Oh, it might be Letting Go. Yeah, he does that. He measures the level of consciousness and looks at love as one of the highest frequencies and shame is one of the lowest, right? And if I'm shaming people online, because judgment and shame go together. How dare you do this? How dare you be that? Right. And that's become, unfortunately, really common in our online culture right now. We're vibrating at a low frequency. So if I can let go of the judgment of that and just say, oh, isn't that interesting that I'm doing that? I wonder what it would be like if I were to choose love. I wonder what it would be like if I could choose compassion. What would it take for me right now to look at this person through the lens of compassion rather than judgment? What would it be like for me? And I'm saying that really consciously because a lot of times I think we say, what would it take, or what would I need to do? So I like to ask, what would it be like? And what I mean by that is to lean into the imagination of what it would feel like if I could love unconditionally. What would it feel like if I were able to recognize I have judgments, because all the humans I know have them. We've heard of these great mythical and mystical teachers that have come that didn't have that, but the human beings I have met, and I've met people that, are very, very powerful spiritual teachers, and they still have the mind. The mind sorts and separates and judge and decides who's safe and who's good and who's bad. So what would it be like to honor that and also recognize that love is a higher frequency, as Alison said? What would it be like for me to tune into that frequency? Because ultimately, we're here to radiate that frequency. When I recognize that it's not an outer search, but an inner search, Alison said we're all seekers. I thought for many years that seeking was outside, the next teacher, the next workshop, the next, experience, the next modality, the next spiritual tradition. And then I realized, oh, wow, all along, it's always been the truth of who I am. And then the journey shifted to, how do I reconnect with or recognize my oneness with that? And then we shift to radiating those higher frequencies, not from a place of judgment, like, oh, I'm bad if I go into shame, or I'm bad if I go into judgment. Okay, oh, look at me. Witness that. Oh, isn't that interesting? I'm tuning into those low frequencies. What do I experience when I'm in judgment? What would it be like to open up and recognize my oneness with all of this in this situation? And when I ask the question, what would it be like, then I can start to use imagination to tune into that frequency and start to live more from that, because it becomes profoundly simple. What brings me more happiness and peace? Is my opinionating helping me to feel connected? Is my judgment helping me to feel what I'm hoping for here? The answer is, it's too obvious to even answer, right? So what do I really want? How can I be that in the world? Life is a great experiment. And right now, we have an opportunity to do this more than ever.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Allison, what do you think? Any
I'm
practical
super in
takeaways?
agreement with what TJ was talking about. I think, we did sort of touch on it in the very beginning about really asking, if you're feeling really disempowered, asking yourself questions rather than beating yourself up like, oh my God, I feel like shit or whatever, like who do I want to be on the other side of this?
Yeah.
What do I want my life to look like? What kind of human being do I want to be? And who do I, how can I serve? And if that even feels too difficult, really just focus on what you can control, focus on that foundation, focus on what you're eating, focus on how you're resting at night. Are you not going to sleep because you're drinking too much coffee too close to bedtime? Or, I mean, it really sounds simple, and it can be. It's not easy, but move your body 30 minutes. Just focus on those things, and that is going to make you feel more centered and strong. And so then you can start asking yourself these, for a lot of people, these questions are like, oh yeah, it's easy for you to say that. You've been doing it for however long. I'm just like here shut in my house. But we're all capable of moving, even if it's in a slight direction. Like you talked about Viktor Frankl, there's that part in there where he's choosing to blink his eyes. That's where his choice gets into, right? So that's the extreme for sure. But I do think, ask for help is really important. If you need help, reach out to one of us and we can help you, or somebody else. But, if you can't pull yourself out of that space, then for sure you need help, because there is light out there. Even during this time, there's still light. And, so focus on what you can control, basically, is what I'm saying in a long-winded way. But, eat, move, and sleep is a place to start.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, Allison, before we log off here, do you want to let people know where they can get a hold of you? If are you taking more clients right now? Are you?
Yeah,
okay,
for sure.
So where can they find you?
You can go to my website, craircoaching.com. You can find me on Facebook, or Instagram is The Recovery Lifestyle, but Crair Coaching, which is CRAIR coaching.com. So relationship coaching, life coaching, recovery coaching, wellness, mindful eating. I don't know. So many things.
The whole thing. TJ, what about you?
Wholehearted.org is the place to go right now. Jeremy and I have been in the studio for a year in the Wholehearted studio creating products, and we've just launched Conscious Recovery, the Experience. That's for anyone who wants to deepen their recovery or to open up to shifting from powerless to powerful. It's like 15 hours of content, and it's exercises, and it really is the perfect moment. We're doing 75% off. We've just extended that all the way through April. That's what we want to offer as a gift. We recognize that some people might have some fear around finances, so we're doing that for 75% off. And we also just launched the clinical training, the Conscious Recovery for Professionals. You get 10 CEs if you're a professional, and it's video content, it's talks, it's exercises. There's 3 different individual sessions that I facilitated that you get to watch and look at what it means, as Allison was talking about. What does it look like when we hold space and we hold our client in the highest and best possibility? Versus I think I know because I'm the clinician. So wholehearted.org is where I would invite people to take a look at. And also there's some great stuff from Gabor Mate on there, Mark Lundholm, Brene Brown. So it's a great resource. There's free content. And then there's a lot of sales right now on the site, because the owner, AJ, is really clear that he wants to be of service right now and offer some of these amazing courses at a discount.
Excellent. All right, you guys. Well, we've run out of time. So Allison, I want to thank you. I know we'll have to do it again.
Absolutely.
But Allison, thank you so much. TJ, as always, thank you for being here. And to anybody watching, if you are struggling during these times, please reach out to any of us, and we will support you however we can. that being said, we'll go ahead and end the live and see you next week on Thursday.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison.